9:30, let's get underway. We've got a tight agenda today and we've got a hard close of midday, so that would be really good. Andrew, do you want to kick us off? Is it?
Well, I'd just like to.
Oh, I should just say also we've got James and Kelly on Zoom as well. So.
Oh, yeah. Hi there, James. Hi, Kelly.
And Yanni is not here yet.
And neither is Kelly.
Yeah.
Kelly?
Okay, great. And we've got our QV here, so we'll welcome Brendan and Chris. So the plan is they've got about a 20-minute presentation, because as you know, the valuations come into effect for this next annual plan. They're going to run through that. Then we've got 10 minutes of questions. What I'm quite keen to do today is limit the repetitive questions from people. So if you've got different questions, ask them. But I want everyone to have an opportunity as opposed to that. And I'll repeat that when Yanni gets here as well. So, yeah, if you want to kick into it, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks. So valuation's obviously an important part of our whole rating system. And at Christchurch City Council, we engage these wonderful people from QV, who are our revaluation service provider, or our valuation service provider. So I'd like to introduce to you Chris and Brendan, both from QV, and they'll just explain to us the revaluation and the process they've gone through to come up with those valuations. So thanks, Chris and Brendan.
Very good, thank you, Andrew. I'll keep this pretty brief and fly through. So yeah, we've just completed these, been verified, these values as of last Friday, which is it's been quite a big, obviously a big job for us. 180,000 assessments, and this work's been going for a very long time. So it's good to have those verified by our auditors, the Office of the Valuer General. I'm just briefly going to talk about a little bit of the process and the tools we use when completing our valuations, the value movements on a general level, some key dates, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. As I said, 180,000 assessments is quite a lot of properties to value. So it requires a big team, and that's our team comprised of 15 registered valuers, 14 more graduate valuers, and they're supported by our national revaluation team, which we've bolstered in recent years on the back of just some regulatory improvements that were requested by our auditors. So, and they are all supported by our own in-house customer care team and IT teams. A little bit on the process. Yeah, as I said, the planning for these big revaluations starts many months in advance. We're valuing to an as-at date of 1st of August. So our planning started in early 2022. And prior to that, we're improving the data the whole time. So we're cleansing sales as they're coming in, and the data improvements being made, and maintenance on the DVR continues, the district valuation role, throughout the 3-year cycle. When revaluation hits, we're gathering secondary evidence. So we're looking at all sorts of evidence on the market and what is going on, what does it play, talking to valuers, agents, and the like. And we're compiling detailed sales analysis, particularly on our business properties and rural properties. And we've got residential in such a big built-up urban area. We do have the weight of numbers for the residential. We then go out and we set the market adjustments relative to those sales, and then we verify those values. So we're out in the field and online checking those, and then we're continuously making adjustments and looking at that market just as at date, because it's a very complicated market for us. Not complicated, but a lot has happened in that 3 years with just the increase in values and then starting to soften at the end. So it's very hard just to get that as at date. That timing was a very crucial part of this revaluation. And then we've bolstered our assurance processes and our peer review internally, and then the values are peer reviewed by the Office of the Valuer General. As I said, data is very important to us. We're improving our data all the time, and that is run predominantly from our national revaluation team. They will set up various checks and data cleansing activities for us to improve the data continuously. We're working with council on the zones and any proposed zones that will be going on and any changes. Resource consents as well, we'll come to that. We're out then inspecting and verifying, and then inspecting all our 2022 sales, so those most relevant sales. As I said, that secondary evidence, real estate agents, valuers, and online were used extensively throughout the process. And I'll briefly touch on the statistical compliance. So part of our rating valuation rules, we need to be compliant with the stats. Won't go into too much detail there. That's a bit dry. And we've developed recent times our own in-house analytics, which helps us. The whole city is broken down into small portions, and we're able to get a good statistical grab of all that relevant information, what's changing, the net rates as relative to what our adjustments have been put on. But I won't go on too much about that. Latest feature that we've actually brought in the middle of the revaluation was our new mapping system, which provides us with dollars per square metre on the land there, as you can see, the heat map, and we've invested quite a lot in that in recent times. We're able to put our different layers on relative to the valuation role, so our different categories combined with, that's your operative plan there on the other sides, and obviously that is the roles. I think that's the Beckenham Loop area, and that's how we're splitting the city up as we're going through this. It's split up into different roles, and within those roles there's sales groups as well, and how that market is performing. And there it is, it's the Akaroa area and the various layers on there. So very, very proud of that mapping that we've developed in recent times. And we actually got council in to help us out when it was getting done. So there's just a picture of them getting involved, which is good to see. And sorry, I alluded on that the peer review process, we have an internal peer review. This has been bolstered up in recent times. So our experienced valuers reviewing it, and then it gets reviewed again by the Office of the Valuer General, and there's a bit of back and forth there. So handing over to Brendan. Brendan's going to talk to you about the residential commercial property sectors.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess one of the key things that everyone needs to know about the rating valuations is that the effective date of the valuation is the 1st of August 2022. So it's that snapshot in time, what were values at that date. Obviously, we've had a really changing market. Post-COVID, interest rates were really low, and values are cranking. We saw huge increases throughout the country. And with New Zealand, the peak kind of hit around the end of 2021, start of 2022. In Christchurch itself, we've kind of seen the peak around January to April in 2022. And that's, values are now softening. Interest rates are increasing. There's inflation. It's taken that heat out of the market completely. So with the residential property market, we're seeing a 49% increase since August 2019. Obviously, residential is the bulk of the city, so 85% of the properties in Christchurch are residential, and that makes up 69% of the value. I think one of the other areas of the market as well is the townhouses. That market is seeing probably more of a decrease than your average kind of house. There's quite a large supply of those being built in the last few years. So that's one area we're seeing a bit more, decline in growth from that peak. So this graph shows the QV house price index. So it just displays that growth. Now that graph, it finishes in December. So just kind of showing how the market played out. The black line at the top is New Zealand, with Christchurch down below. So you can see that peak was around the start of 2022. It has come down a little bit, but not so much compared to the rest of the country. The whole reval date being centred around the 1st of August 2022 does make things confusing for some people. Like the values were coming out this week to the public, and if we just use the QV house price index as an indicator, it kind of shows that values have dropped 2% from the effective date of valuation to today, or we could say that for Christchurch they've dropped about 6% from the peak if we're talking to today, whereas New Zealand as a whole has dropped about 11% from the peak of the market up to today. That just shows the house price index again, but it just shows more the average values on that graph. So it's much the same shape. It's just showing what the average values are. The the average price at the reval date was 700. Oh, sorry, this is the current value, isn't it?
That's December, yeah.
Yeah. So the December average value was 758,000. But for our reval date, the average house price for Christchurch was sitting around 770,000. So it has come back a little bit. The commercial market obviously makes up a much smaller portion in terms of numbers, but commercial industrial properties do have higher values. We're still seeing large increases from 2019 in the commercial industrial sector, mostly driven by lower yields in the market. Although throughout 2022 we did start to see a bit of softening in yields there, so yields coming up and values coming down. Overall, the commercial values have gone up 22.9%, while industrial has gone up 26.2%. One of our areas in the CBD, we're seeing increased rents back in the market, where the last revaluation we actually decreased rents by quite a bit. But the story last time in 2019 was an oversupply of office space, and with less office space being built, it's kind of filled up a bit more in the last 3 years or so. So the rents have gone up there. We have seen some growth in values there, particularly. Chris, I'll pass back to you.
In the rural sector, not a lot of properties, predominantly on the peninsula. There's also 2,222 lifestyle properties in the district, and that is probably a big talking point here. The lifestyle has outperformed the residential on average, just slightly, and that's a trend we've noticed nationally. Not as affected by the interest rates and their home ownership there. Pastoral market has 489 properties, and that's been held up in part, a lot of that by that lifestyle influence, particularly out in the peninsula. And we're seeing good demand for properties with a lovely view of the sea, which why wouldn't you? Generally a lack of listings now in Banff Peninsula. A pretty steady number of sales coming in over the 3-year cycle. There's a revaluation overview. I think the big talking points here would be the residential going up 49.1% on CVs on average across the city, and that is driven in large part by the land value growth. Various land value growth across the city, obviously 82.4% land value increase, and that was a major talking point through the revaluation and the audit process. That'll be in contrast to commercial, which we're seeing is going up 22.9% on CVs, and industrial at 26.2%. Overall, the city now has seen 43.5% growth through this revaluation over the 3-year cycle, and 71.2% of that has been made up by that increase in the land value. And this is the same numbers on a graph form. As you'll see there, the one standing out, the residential land growth there, land value growth, and compared to the commercial industrial, which hasn't been performing as well. This is residential dwelling average value. We've got now 7 sales groups or suburbs over the 1 million average mark throughout the city. And here's the value change throughout. And as you can see, that orange lines there are the land value growth, driving much of that value growth across the city. And that's having a larger increase within the lower value areas. So they've come up at a higher rate than the higher value areas. And it's just that affordability and entry-level first home buyers and investment property buyers driving a lot of that. Moving along, just some key dates. Effective day of the valuation, as Brendan alluded to, was the 1st of August. So that's a really important message for all homeowners out there, that the market has continued to soften since that date. And these values that have been now verified by the Office of the Valuer General will be, for rating purposes, used from the 1st of July 2023. And the public notice will go out tomorrow. be notified of that, the homeowners, and owners' notices will be submitted in the post from the 8th of February. Everyone who has a homeowner or is a ratepayer has the option to object to their rating valuations if they don't agree with it, and this period of objection is left open until the 16th of March 2023. That's about it from us. If anyone had any questions, please fire away.
Thank you very much. That's a really useful and concise presentation. I think Dawn was going to mention something first.
Just not just for elected members' benefit, but also for our public if they are watching. This valuation process is a requirement that local authorities have to do by statute every 3 years. It's not a matter of choice for us. It's something that we have to do. And obviously we employ an independent body to do that on our behalf. So the clarity, just to make sure you're aware of that. Thanks.
Great. So we've got a bit of time for questions. I just had one, which was around the objection period. So I don't know if you want to flick back just to that last slide you had. So that one there, so it's got objection period closes 16th of March. Do you want to just talk us through, so if people are concerned about their value, they might object in that time, and then what happens then?
So all information will be on the owner's notices that goes out to owners. They can lodge an objection on our website or just by contacting council and forwarding them on to us. We will inspect every property. We'll have an on-site inspection of every property that a homeowner will object to. And then there'll be a revaluation of that individual property based on the sales. We'll take a closer look at that property. Sometimes the homeowner's completed new work that they want accounted for on that, so we will take into account the new kitchen and bathroom that they've put in. These are all things we wouldn't get on a building consent. We wouldn't have that information available to us. So
in terms of timing, though, will that be? I mean, do you rule on that pretty quickly, or do you revalue pretty quickly? I'm just thinking we'll strike our annual plan effective 1st of July.
Yep.
So are we likely to have outcomes for people in Christchurch who have objected by that time?
We were going to do our very best to get them all done in that time.
Yeah.
We will likely see over 3,000 objections. So yeah, it is quite a lot to do in a very short period of time. We were sort of experiencing a bit of a change in our calendar year for the rating valuations. It's been lengthened out at the request of the OVG. So they've lengthened out the revaluation program throughout the whole country. So it's just very difficult for us to get those objections done before the 1st of July. We will endeavour to do them all, and we're geared up to do that.
Okay.
We'll get most of them
We
done.
will,
Yeah,
yeah,
we'll get most
yeah.
of them done.
We'll focus on
Maybe,
the higher
maybe.
risk ones as well.
Yeah.
So
And I guess
once-
the only other thing is probably just for an efficiency point of view, it's probably easier if people go directly to QV as opposed to coming through council with their objections, rather than just creating another layer when you've got teams and
Yes.
we certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think you guys do it for nothing for us. Okay, so who else has? So Pauline is first, and then Tyrone, and then Yanni. Yep.
I was just following up on yours, Sam. What's the cost for people to lodge an objection? Do you know?
No cost at all.
It's no cost.
No.
Thank you.
Just on Akaroa, do you think you've got a big enough
sample size to be able to determine the price change accurately? It's so small, and so few properties go on the market that a couple of real big ticket ones will actually could blow the whole calculations out, quite easily.
In Akaroa? Yeah, we did see quite a lot of sales in Akaroa leading up to the August date, probably a higher proportion than we have the last revaluation. But I see what you mean. We have to use our valuation principles when determining on a lack of sales. So we'll have to look for properties before Akaroa around Devotionals or around Wainui, example. Where would you rather be? You've got a scattering of sales evidence and you're comparing to the different properties. But there was a solid amount of sales in Akaroa.
Because you lump Peninsula all together as one.
Yeah, that's
group.
just for our sort of statistical groups. We have roles within those sales groups, so we would hone it in tighter, and then we've got valuers on the ground checking the streets as he's going along.
So is the Peninsula everything that isn't Akaroa? or Littleton, which was misspelt, by the way, just saying. Just
Oh, thank you. Cheers. I'll put that in. Cheers.
That won't affect the valuation, Tyrone.
it's just a microaggression.
We've corrected the spelling on our database within
Awesome,
council.
thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, Brendan.
Great. Okay.
No, sorry, but you were saying, so like the peninsula is everything that's not Akaroa and Littleton?
Well, Governor's Bay, the West, the Littleton Bays have their own sales group. This is just the way that we statistically group properties on how the market performs in little patches. Akaroa has its own role that we would keep it separate because we feel that there's enough sales in there to make a determination.
Sorry, just a real quick follow-up. Just on that, I was real intrigued by the lifestyle property numbers, so 2,222.
Yeah.
So so most of those are in the peninsula?
High proportion. There's still a lot of around the periphery of the city, and those are seeing some good value growth in their land values just due to those future considerations on those properties. As the city sometimes sprawls out over time, people will buy with the view of what's going to happen in the future. So those land values closer to town, those 4 hectare blocks or 2 hectare blocks further north, they sell at quite a good clip.
So what's the definition of a lifestyle property for this?
Good question. It's often debated. Anything over 4,000 square metres generally, but depending on the makeup of the property, it could be one site with a cliff face. So it's on a case by case basis.
Okay.
Yeah, like Clearwater, you've got larger sites than that, but we wouldn't call those lifestyle. They're residential.
Yeah.
It depends on the location. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Yanni.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies, I can't access the slides because of my computer. But it's the third one I'm on and it still doesn't work. Anyway, I think you had a graph, but I couldn't quite see it from here. I was just trying to understand, just in terms of land value versus improvement value percentage change across residential suburbs. Can you give a kind of idea or an understanding of where we've seen those suburbs, particularly in the east, grow really quickly in terms of value? How much has been driven by land value increase relevant to like zoning considerations versus capital improvement?
Yep. So when we set rating valuations, we'll look at the land value, and we'll set the land value, and then we will set the capital value, and whatever is left, the residual, is those value of improvements. So with this, the land value growth that we've seen over the 3-year period, that has had the effect on a number of properties to reduce the value of improvements that's left over.
Right.
And the land value that's our goal. When we're analysing sales, we're looking for our land sales that are market sales that we can hang our hat on that say, like, this is a good indicator of the land value in that particular area. So the capital values, we have a lot more of improved property sales, so we can statistically get a good handle on those in urban areas. And then whatever those value of improvements are, that is just the residual.
Right. So take an area like Bromley.
Yeah.
If we looked at terms of what was happening in terms of land value, would it match kind of would it be a lot higher, which is why across versus rest of the city in terms of percentage, and that's what's leading to the huge increase in valuation for those?
All these values are ranging from around 40 to 60% across the different sales groups on the CV growth, but in the the lower land values, then they're starting at a lower base. They've increased just to that higher percentage.
Right.
So they're going from potentially in that area around 90,000 to 180 to 220. They've increased dramatically, but it's still at an affordable level. It's just that percentage.
I see Bromley's gone up land value like 130 something %, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So
And that's yes.
because it's a lower starting point on your land values.
So have you looked around, do you look at, sorry, and you may have covered this at the start, but how do you look at external factors around things like odour, industry adjacent to residential?
We look at basically at the sales evidence. That's what it comes down to. Valuation is what the property would sell for. So we're looking at market sales of property at that time, and we're basing our values based on that. it's hard to put a number figure or a value figure on the odours that were occurring.
Yeah, on every component, but you have to take the best information available to us. So we'll have, we're not, I want to say lucky enough, but due to the earthquakes, there's been a number of land sales throughout the city, more so than in most urban areas. So there is quite a good diet of land values sales.
So I'm just conscious of time, and I've got Aaron and Victoria and Dawn as well. So Aaron.
So just on the equation, when you're showing the towers of the land value going up more than the property value, so as in the building, but building costs have gone up dramatically in that time. So a question might be, how does the land go up so much more than buildings when buildings are going up so much?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And is it, what is the, I mean, how do we know that's accurate versus just house and land in every area is selling, so which one's actually going up more than the other? Because you live in the house more than on the land, so to speak.
Yeah, you do. But the our land value sales are our land value sales. We set that. That is our gold, right? So that sets the land values. We have plenty of sales of all different property types.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is that on the older properties, in some areas, those value of improvements that are decreasing just because of that value of the land being so high.
Right.
So that demand for the land is in part driving a lot of the market. And we've seen that throughout the last, this unprecedented increase in values throughout New Zealand. Like the land, in a really hot market, the land value just takes off. And conversely, in a softening market, that land value decreases faster than the capital values.
And has the government's direction to intensify changed the land values much at this point?
Another good question. Well, obviously you guys did not adopt that, but
You're about to be forced to. So.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I'm aware. But I think you've got a good plan here. You know, we're a flat area of land that is well zoned, so it's not as required as many other cities, in my opinion. So no, it hasn't had as much of an effect.
Okay, we might go to Victoria and then Dawn, because we've got 2 minutes, and then we're moving on.
Oh, thanks, Sam. I noticed on the rural slide you mentioned that there was good demand for properties with close proximity to the coastline. I'm just interested to know whether there's any comment to make in respect of residential properties with proximity to coastline or low-lying areas, given some of the extreme weather and the climate change considerations that are top of people's minds. I'm just curious to know about that.
Yep. So a lot of those lifestyle properties with the coastlines have a spectacular view, and we've just been experiencing a really strong market leading into August, and good features seem to increase values exponentially at that time. And likewise, we in a good strong market, your marginal land is still increasing. It's people, but in a softening market, they will become a bit more pickier because of the supply and options available. So that's just a broad statement. We haven't seen any fire sales of land, no, due to flooding or any natural hazard risks.
Okay, we haven't got time. So we've got Dawn, and then we're going to have to move on. Yeah.
So this is probably a question that the public would ask if they were sat in the room. If you go to the graph, which is the residential, and you're seeing the dip, and you talked about a 2% drop, and it's a point in time when the valuation is done, and that point in time was relatively high to what's happening in the market currently. I think the public could get quite angry of saying you're overvaluing, when in reality the market is going one way at the moment. Can you just respond to that, please?
I guess one way to put it is that the whole city has been treated the same as at that point in time. So no one's been treated unfairly, I suppose. It's at that time, it's the time that we, by law, had to value it by.
So the decreases are all relative, so to speak. So I think you mentioned there was like a 2% drop since the August
Yes.
sort of valuation date. But you could argue that every property's kind of come down by that 2%. Therefore, it's
Yeah, I mean every
the
single
pie's still split the same way.
Yeah, I mean different segments of the market will act differently. But
Okay. And there is an objection process as well. So.
yes.
Okay, very good. Hey, well, thank you both very much for coming in and running through that. And like I say, we'll be all the councillors, when they get contacted, as they will no doubt, will be sure to send their complaints to you. So,
Very good. Well done.
Great.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brendan. Cheers.
Great. Peter, do you want to come through and set the scene, and then we'll move through the team?
Good morning, everyone. It's just a quick couple of slides from me to provide some context before we go on, and then we'll move to Russell Holden, Andrew Jeffries, and the finance team to step you through the detail. Look, apologies to those of you who've heard some of this context before. It will be brief. We've followed a quite detailed process here. Councillors and staff have worked together numerous times since October, really, but certainly November, December, to bring down what was initially a very intimidating potential rates increase. We've worked closely with elected members, the community boards, and this is the second of the public briefings so that our community can follow the process that we're following and how we've done it. I know that you're well aware of these conditions. This slide hasn't changed in a couple of months because the situation hasn't changed. We're still looking at a very stable cost of living increase, and anybody who's been to a supermarket or anywhere else knows what that looks like. Inflation is still with us and appears to be steady. The revaluation impacts we'll talk through in detail, and you've just heard the briefing on that. The net effect is that there's a compound effect on our communities that is concerning. We're seeing some early signs of the effects of that, and they will probably continue through the coming year. So in that light, we've worked hard on bringing the number down in two ways. One is looking at best value for money and efficiencies, and you'll see that in the OPEX savings that Russell will step you through. There's also been, I think, rephasing is a better word for the capital program to bring it down to a deliverable level where we can provide certainty that what we're doing is actually, what we're proposing is something we can actually deliver in the environment we're in. That means that some of our work has had to be rephased out to future years. There will be options on adjusting the business differential, and that's obviously something quite complex and detailed. The team will step you through how that's more of a problem of distribution than quantum of the rates. The net effect is that we started at 14.6% as a raw number. We've brought that down as a team of staff, councillors and other stakeholders down to about 7%. Through savings and rephasings and the conventional steps. Then there's a further reduction down to 5.6%. But that's been achieved, and I want to stress this, by a series of one-off savings that cannot be replicated every year. They're not sustainable in the long term. This is a special year, and we've put in the whole team has put in a special effort to bring it down to 5.6, which I think will compare very favourably to other authorities around the country, simply because we're well aware that this is going to be an exceptional year for a lot of people. So that's the context to where we started and where we've got to, and what's to be deliberated today. The two main topics, and they're provided separately so that we're clear that they are separate issues. One is the impact of the revaluation. So at this point, I'll hand over to Russell Holden, Andrew Jeffries, to step you through the breadcrumb trail of how we got to 5.6 and take the discussion from there.
Thanks very much, Peter. Councillors, good morning to everybody. So just given the presentation by Credible Values, we thought it pertinent to start off this part of the briefing with just going through the revaluation, the impact it's going to have on rates, and some mitigating factors that we're proposing to put in place. So I'll just hand you over to Andrew now, and he'll run through that, and we'll take some questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Russell. Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to cover a quick introduction to rates and the revaluation. We'll look at the 2022 revaluation specifically, and then we're going to look at the implications of that for rates increases, and then we'll have a chat about the business differential, which is one way that we can respond to some aspects of the rates increase. And we'll finish by looking at the rates increases by suburb. This slide has got a lot in it, but essentially down the left-hand side, we've tried to list every one of our 16 rates. And I've sort of grouped them into categories: general rates, targeted rates, and excess water rates. And on the right-hand side, you can see the size of those rates in terms of revenue. And the takeaway from that is that the biggest rate is our general value-based rate, which is right up the top. We've also got a little bit of, the other ones that are quite significant are the 3 water targeted rates: sewer, water supply, and land drainage. Also, we'll notice that the based on column, a lot of our rates, and especially all the big ones, are capital value based. So we're very capital value dependent in Christchurch for our rating. The other thing to highlight from this is the differentials column. Some of our rates have differentials which allow us to charge some groups a kind of a multiplier effect of that rate. And in particular, looking at the general rate that has differentials for standard, business, remote rural, and city vacant. And we're going to come back in particular to the business differential later in the presentation. So it's worth remembering in this slide where the business differential fits in. Just take you through the way that we calculate rates. In our annual plan process, just before, in late June, council will approve a number of decimals, 1 decimal for each of our rates, and that decimal is on the right-hand side there, and the left-hand side shows how we calculate that decimal. And so, if I use an example, say, of the sewerage rate, we'd take the revenue requirement for the sewerage rate, would be the top line, divided by the tax base for the sewerage rate. And the sewerage rate tax base is essentially the capital value of all properties that pay that sewer rate, that are essentially close to the sewer network. And that's how we reach the decimal. I won't go through the example, but that you can reflect on. A really key point to make about the revaluation is that the revaluation itself doesn't change total rates for the city. And the example I use is this pie over the right-hand side there. The pie represents our planned rates revenue. The capital values in the city are really just a way of divvying that pie up between different ratepayers. So if capital values change, the pie stays the same size, but the way we divvy that up between ratepayers can change. At risk of kind of overemphasizing this point too much, if you own 1% of the city, roughly speaking, you'll pay 1% of the rates. And reflecting on that, it does mean that if all capital values were to increase, let's say by 50%, that would actually have no impact whatsoever on rates. Everyone would pay the same amount as before. Of course, we don't have just the revaluation happening, we've also got the rates increase as part of the annual plan. So we need to remember whether we're looking at just the revaluation impact or the revaluation plus our annual plan stuff for next year. I think I've covered most of that. So just to repeat that the reason we rate on capital value is essentially because at the moment we think it is the best tool that we have available for indicating ability to pay.
So, Andrew, just for absolute clarity, and I'm looking at our media colleague just to your right.
Yes.
This means the council does not get more money at all. It's the pie remains exactly the same size. It's the distribution within, because often that is difficult to understand, and I appreciate why that might be.
Great. So the revaluation, as we've said, it has to be undertaken every 3 years, and the last time we did it was August 2019. Key dates which you've heard from QV this morning are that we're basing the valuations on market conditions as they were at the 1st of August 2022. Essentially, we are taking a physical snapshot of what's in place at a particular point in time, say 16 January, and we're valuing that based on market conditions at the 1st of August.
1st of July.
Yes, and and that valuation will apply for rates from the 1st of July 2023. The valuation, revaluation does show residential rating units increasing quite a lot, and in particular more than business rating units, which will be relevant in some of our future slides. Because without some kind of reaction from council, that will transfer the rates burden away from the business sector and towards the residential sector. This is a distribution of CV changes. So on the bottom axis, you've got the percentages that the CV has changed. We've got a residential curve, which is sort of in the middle, the blue one, and that is centred, roughly on about 47% CV increase. On the left-hand side, you've got the sort of orange one, which is red in my chart, is businesses. And a key point here is that businesses, the distribution essentially of the business CV rates increases is to the left of the residential curve. I've also shown remote rural, and now remote rural, the green one, is actually quite a small sector, but I'm scaling everything up to 100% if that makes sense. So the green one, looks quite high, but in fact it's a very small sector. And the black one is just everything that's not covered in the other ones, which is about 15% of the city. And there, the spike, by the way, at 100% on the right-hand side is mostly vacant land, which is in the other category. This chart is very similar to the last one, but now I'm showing the rates impact due to the revaluation. And importantly, again, just coming back to the pie, the average rates increase from the revaluation will be 0. But that doesn't mean everyone has a 0%. It means that on average it is. Some people will be impacted and have higher rates because of the reval, but whenever you've got someone higher, there'll be someone lower. And again, the key point is that the residential bell curve is to the right of the business bell curve. And the centre, essentially, the centre of gravity of the blue bell curve is about 3.4%. So on average, residential properties will get a 3.4. And the centre of gravity of the business one is minus 12%. So a rates decrease of 12% for businesses. Our key headline number for rates increase is that 5.6%. It's worth remembering that that 5.6% is made up of the increase in our rates requirement, less growth in the city. So in fact, our rates requirement might be going up, say 6.9%, but because we've got 1.3% genuine growth in our city, the increase to existing ratepayers is 5.6. It's important to distinguish in your minds the difference between genuine growth in the city and growth that's just due to a revaluation. So the 1.3, we're trying to extract the genuine growth that we're expecting to happen in the city. The 5.6% is also broken down primarily, that is an increase in the Three Waters targeted rates. The general rates increase is very low, or essentially negligible. So it's worth keeping that in mind, that what we've got here is quite a significant increase in our Three Waters targeted rates. Just a technical note, I've increased the UAGC from 145 to 153 in this analysis. That's the uniform annual general charge that we have, trying to keep it in line with other rates. This next chart is again very similar to the last one, but this time we're including the annual plan 5.6% increase. So essentially what we're doing here is taking all those curves and shifting them to the right by 5.6%. That's not exactly what it is, but it's pretty close intuitively. That does mean that if we don't do anything like, for example, change the business differential, the average house will have an increase of 10.5%. And remember, that is the average house. So based on the bell curve, some houses will have considerably higher than 10.5 and some would have considerably lower. And again, we've got our business sector having a rates decrease on average. Just coming back to the business differential, our business differential is applied to any property used for a commercial or industrial purpose, or zoned commercial or industrial, except where it's used for a residential purpose. Now, the business differential at the moment is 1.697, and I've just put some other cities and their business differentials up there to show that our current business differential is very low relative to other cities at the moment. We're going to put forward two options for you today. The first is that we don't make any change to the business differential, and then the rates impact for FY24 will be as we showed a couple of slides ago, that one there. Option 2 will be to change the business differential, and that is what staff are recommending. The proposal aims to ensure that the business sector pays the same proportion of rates as they did in the current year, and residential sector would pay the same proportion of rates as they do this year. It moves, jumping back 2 slides, it moves the red bell curve and the blue bell curve closer together. The intent for that is just to prevent a greater rates burden being placed on the residential sector, and we remember those residential rates increase numbers from a couple of slides ago. So our recommendation is to increase the business differential from 1.697 to 2.25. We will provide you with a section 101.3 analysis, which would like you to consider, as that's required to consider this in the context of that section. This is the distribution of rates increases that people are going to face if we were to increase the business differential to 2.25. It's brought the blue and the red curves together, and the average rates increases are now essentially our 5.6 number. So we've got 5.7% for the average house, 5.6% for the average business. Again, individual properties will vary, which is what a bell curve communicates to us. I've got a few more slides. They're going to show the impact on residential properties by suburb, the rates impact, and then we'll just quickly look at some example properties. Some key points when we look at residential properties by suburb is that obviously some suburbs will have increased in value more than others, and while those property owners have, I guess, increased equity, increased wealth, they will be paying higher rates. If your CV goes up more than average, you will attract slightly higher rates increases. The differences between suburbs are really an unavoidable feature of the fact that we base rates on capital value, and we have to have a revaluation every 3 years. So that naturally leads over time to suburbs moving in different ways. This is a chart. It's a bit similar to the one that QV showed us earlier. Pay attention to the blue bars first of all. That's our rates increase for next year on average by suburb. So take someone in the middle, say Burwood. That would be a rates increase of, I'm guessing about 5.7, 5.8% on average for Burwood residential properties. We have some out the right, in particular some of our lower value suburbs, particularly say in eastern Christchurch on the would be the right hand 3 columns. But we also have some higher value suburbs with high-ish increases. We've got Maryvale and Beckenham and Cashmere, all sort of quite to the right hand side there as well. The orange bars represent the increase that would arise purely from the revaluation, and generally that makes up a component of the blue bar. There's one suburb, the Peninsula, which is a bit different from everyone else, and that's because only about 30% of Peninsula properties pay the targeted rates. So they've actually increased in value a lot out in the Peninsula, but because they tend not to pay targeted rates, the rates increase doesn't really affect them so much. Remember, our rates increases focused on more on targeted rates than on the general component. These are some example properties. I've chosen 6 properties, one for each suburb, and I've tried to choose properties that are very average for that suburb. So we've got 6 suburbs form our columns, and I know this is sort of death by numbers a little bit, so we'll just get ourselves oriented in what this table means. The top 3 rows show capital value for each suburb, and in particular for this one property that I've chosen for each suburb, and I've got the old capital value and the new capital value and the percentage increase. And you'll notice essentially I've listed these suburbs from left to right in order of the size of that percent increase in capital value. Then the next row shows the current rates that house pays in FY23. The next 3 rows show what the rates would be in FY24 if we kept the business differential unchanged at 1.697. And I've shown the dollar change and the percent change by suburb. And then the next 3 rows are the same information, but if we increase the business differential to 2.25, which you'll remember brings down the residential rates increase. The key numbers for me are to think about our most, the suburbs that are increasing the most in capital value. That would be, say, Bromley. And we're looking at about a 12.5% rates increase on average for Bromley residential properties. Another point perhaps to bring out is that the dollar value of the increase obviously also depends on the size of the capital value of the property. So you'll notice Merivale and Cashmere properties near the bottom of this table are actually paying a higher rates increase in dollar terms than the Bromley property. Almost last slide. This is similar information but for non-residential properties. I think I'll let you kind of absorb this on your own, except to note that it is slightly curious that we've got a non-rateable property on the right-hand side. I would have thought non-rateable properties pay no rates at all, but in fact they do pay rates. They pay only the sewer and water rate. And so when you've got a very high value non-rateable property, like this is a school, they do actually pay, moderately significant rates. But remember, they're only paying the sewer and water rate there. And for a lot of non-rateable properties like churches and some other non-rateable properties, we do have a rates remission, which can remit even these rates. Just to finish off, last slide, revaluation next steps, I think we've covered that. We did get audit clearance on Friday, which I was very pleased about. Nationally, there's a lot of councils are not getting audit approval or struggling to get audit approval. So it is really good that we've managed to get that audit approval on Friday for our valuation numbers. We're going to be putting them on our website tomorrow. We'll send out the letters after Waitangi weekend. You've got until 16 March to object, and we'll use those valuations from 1 July 2023.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. And I just really appreciate the presentation you've done. I know we had one from you on this topic before Christmas, and again, yes, it certainly informed me a lot more about, I guess, how rating works, but also the impact of the external factors like the QV doing the valuations on us. And I guess what is really telling from this is you've been able to get the balance right between, and the biggest thing for me was around ensuring that even though differentials may change, actually the quantum of money and sort of which part of the pipe sits hasn't really changed. And I think you struck a really good balance there, and even relative to the rest of the country. So really appreciate the presentation. Thanks. We have got a few minutes before we're going to have a break. So we'll go with Sarah, and then Aaron, then Yanni, and then Tyrone.
Just a couple of quick questions for clarification. The business differential, how does the proposal, our current business differential and the proposal compare to other metropolitan centres? That might be useful.
So at 2.25, we're still lower than everyone I can see on that table.
Yeah. And the slide you've got with the suburbs, what it makes it, I'm just wondering if there's the potential to put an extra line in at some point if this is going to be used for broader communications around the annual plan and things. Mm-hmm. What it does do is make it look like the change in the business differential has made people's rates go up further than the revaluation. Did you see what I mean? Like the blue line is higher because it includes the business differential. And I'm just wondering if that could be separated out, because actually the business differential thing lowers them a bit, and then it's the rates increase itself that puts them back up again.
I could provide a third bar which would show the increase if we kept the business differential unchanged.
Because at the moment it looks like that's made them go up.
Yep.
Business differential questions again. When was the last time that moved? How long have we run that number for?
Yeah,
the current number?
it has moved slightly in some years. I
Up or
can't
down?
both. Basically, since the earthquakes, I won't say it hasn't changed. It has changed slightly. I think I actually provided a slide on this at a previous presentation. It's not in this pack, but I could send that out again. It just shows the history of our business.
Let's do that,
differential.
Andrew. Let's just resupply the information so members have got
Yeah, because
reminded of
if
it.
the valuations had gone the other way,
Yeah.
say residential had moved or gone down or whatever, and business was up, would we adjusted the business differential so they didn't take as big a hit?
That would be for you to decide. But
So I guess that is probably it's a really good point because, and again, it's probably worth just reminding everyone, this isn't a decision that's been made. This is a potentially a proposal. So there'll be debate around it. It's like whether that differential comes back and we put more onto residential and things like that. So yeah, it'll definitely be worked through, but it will be a council decision after feedback. Yeah. Okay, Yanni and then Tyrone.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, like QV have already got the new valuations up, but our website's is down. So is there any reason why QV have them up ahead of our own website? And when will our own website be showing the new property valuations?
Our website will be showing it tomorrow. I think I'm actually hoping to get it up tonight, but it may well be first thing tomorrow morning.
But just so I'm clear, we got valuations only on Friday, didn't we? We got clearance on Friday.
We got clearance on Friday. We've had the weekend. We've been uploading the values from the QV.
The point I'm trying to make is you've only had about 3 days, including a weekend.
Oh no, but I just find it weird that QV would be able to release them ahead of us as a council.
Well, it's not a question for Andrew. So have you got a different question?
Yeah, just in terms of the UAGC, thank you for the response. So that would have an impact in reducing the percentage increase for the poorest areas that have got the biggest increases. So I'm just trying to understand why you're still recommending an increase to UAGC rather than a further reduction. Because it seems like that would be one of the levers you could pull to get a more equitable distribution of the percentage increase.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So the reason for the movement is the UAGC at this point is just in alignment with the general rate. The UAGC is just a portion of the general rate. The general rate is mixed up of two parts. One is the CV per property, and the other is the UAGC that's paid per property. So any movement, of course, in the UAGC will have an impact. But we did do some calculations, and it's fairly minor in the movement.
It does change things a little bit, but some suburbs will go up and others down slightly. So it still leaves, a very similar looking distribution, but some suburbs would be different.
But it does look like from the graph that you provided that the lowest economic areas that have got the biggest, the nearly 12 to 13% rates increase are the ones that would benefit the most by a reduction of the UAGC.
Yeah, low value properties will benefit more from reducing the UAGC. That's true. Yeah.
And just the final question I had was just trying to get my head around kind of that QV stuff. Like in terms of the land values, which seem to be very, very high in some areas. Is that, it's kind of a bit like the question Councillor Kieran asked, but like the land value is driving up property prices and the land value is high because of the permissive zoning that we have.
Yeah.
So is it kind of fair to kind of make the assumption that some of the reasons why the properties prices have gone through the roof in the lower socioeconomic areas has been the developers paying a huge premium for bare land?
I think, through you, Chair, it's difficult to say exactly all the reasons, and I think the guys from QV sort of attempted to do that. It's basically the data is built on sales history. So what's driving that demand for those properties? And generally, it can be price. If you can get into the market, that's your starting point, and there's lots of demand for people coming into the market, then that's just going to drive up. It's a classic supply and demand.
Yep, I think you've asked and answered. Tyrone?
Actually, just to extend on that a little bit. So, obviously, just the distribution is different on different suburbs. So, let's just say the suburbs where there's a negative number. So, in terms of the market dynamic, is that these suburbs have been historically overvalued, or perhaps become less desirable, or maybe a combination of
I
those.
think it just shows that those suburbs, say Avonhead, have increased in value less than other suburbs. And just to sort of emphasise this, the valuations are based on sales, actual, market sales that have happened. So it's not something that we kind of are causing, or some methodological error, or something that actually reflects real sales that have happened. So
So softer demand in those suburbs, probably.
Yeah, I mean,
indicative of less
that's
desirability.
Tyrone, looking at it, it's Central City, Avonhead, Ilam, so you could even blame Jake and I as the local reps.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Celeste. Yep.
I just wanted if you could sort of reconfirm a bit of information about the UAGC.
Yes.
I note that it's within the revenue and financing policy that recognises the regressive nature of it, so it does tend to impact lower income households. Have we done some modelling around, because I see it's gone up slightly rather than going down? Have we looked at adjusting that down?
So we've provided separately in a previous presentation a chart showing fixed charges at a range of different councils, including all the big cities and others near us, Waimak and Selwyn. I think we need to look at not just the UAGC but all fixed charges, because it's fixed charges as a whole that impact the ratepayer, and we are one of the lowest councils around in terms of our fixed charges. Yes, we could reduce the UAGC. That would be a decision you could make, but we would be then even more heavily dependent than we are at the moment on capital value as our way of recovering rates.
And I see that there was a comment there that we can look at increase. It can potentially come from the business differential. That could, in terms of lost revenue, we could use that as another means to recoup some of the lost revenue from the UAGC. Is that right?
I see. So if the UAGC went down, that means we need to recover more money from the CV-based rate, and that means that of that money that we have to recover, remembering that the value-based rate has the differentials in it, so it would tend to push that towards business. Following the logic through, that means business would pay a higher proportion of rates than it does now, so we'd have to reduce the business differential to keep them at the same proportion. So there's a lot happening, mathematically when you reduce the UAGC. I've provided, I think, to councillors some information about what a $50 UAGC would do.
Okay, so I think that concludes this part of the presentation. We might have a 10. So thank you both very much for that. That was really informative, and I can assure you it won't be the last time you're back in front of us over this issue. So it's 20 to 11. Can everyone come back at 10 to 11? So 10 minutes, and we'll get through to the next bit. I think Peter, you're going to start that off, aren't you? So. We could take our seats, and Peter, if you can come up to the table, please. Daryl, can someone shut that door? Is it all right? It's just.
Thanks, Jake.
Oh, cheers, man. Thanks. Okay, Andre and Celeste, you guys good to go? Or? Yep.
This week could be good.
Great. Peter, do you want to start? And so, again, you're just giving a quick overview, and then we're going to move through OPEX and things like that.
That's right. Just a few reminders, and then Russell will step you through the changes that have occurred to OPEX and the drivers behind them. Very briefly, from here, we take the direction and consensus of this meeting, and we will move forward as staff to prepare the draft for adoption on the 28th of February. Audit and risk will meet briefly before that to make sure the process has been fit for purpose. Go out to consultation 10th of March to the 10th of April, followed by what I think for most of you is a relatively standard process by now. Submissions, we do an analysis of those submissions for you, and then you go into hearings for people who want to actually speak to you about the draft annual plan. And then obviously we meet again and go into a final process for June adoption in late June of the annual plan. Just a quick reminder of what's changed. I know you've seen some of these frequently before. It's fair to say there's no clear view of the medium-term outlook. It all depends on which variety of expert you believe. There is no way we can hang our hat on a complete number that is reliable around inflation, interest, or any of those factors. That's one of the reasons why this annual plan has been, fair to say, quite difficult for an annual plan. This is at the same time as we've got significant cost escalation. It is worth pointing out for those relatively new to local government that we don't buy the things that are in the consumer price index, which is the basket of goods around domestic consumption, bread, milk and clothing. We buy things that are actually considerably more expensive. Asphalt, steel, diesel, engineers, things like that. So if you've had anything to do with construction lately, you'll know that CPI is not what we're all about. Those things are going up quite quickly if you can get them at all. Clearly there are cost and labour shortages as well. Getting the right people is a national-wide problem for New Zealand at the moment and probably will be well into the medium term. Attracting and retaining talent is the name of the game at the moment. The market, in terms of people we can give work to, is not infinite. They're already signalling that they are managing the rate at which they accept work. So it isn't as simple as if you've got the money, you can therefore go spend it. Anybody who tries to get work done on their house at the moment will know at a micro level, you can't, just because you've got the money doesn't mean you can make it happen. So in other words, we need to look beyond our normal forecasts, and I guess our attempt to drive the rates down to 556 has been really based on the precautionary principle of we've got to protect our communities. So look, the team now will step you through what we've done to bring operating expenditure, staff costs down. There will also be an overview of what we've done to bring the capital program down to a deliverable level. It is worth noting that even though we've managed to get the rates down to what I suspect will be significantly lower than most authorities, we have not cut levels of service to do that. And we've continued to build a capital program that will take the city forward while maintaining our assets. So as a balancing act, it's been a bit tricky. And I think at this point, one last point, Three Waters, basically, as you know, the direction from central government is that Three Waters will not be included in Council's 2024 long-term plan for any councils in New Zealand. Until then, we will continue to maintain Three Waters to a fit-for-purpose standard, and that's built into this annual plan. We are continuing to engage with the Department of Internal Affairs on exactly how the process will work from here. And I think now I might hand over to you, Russell.
Brilliant. Thank you, Peter. So just a reminder from that initial briefing to where we are now, so a bit of a history. So we started at 14.6. Now when I say started, that was the first look at updating the model from the LTP data updating for things that were known, like inflation, like interest rates increases, like proposed changes of level from staff and other factors coming through. So that was never actually going to be what the rates were, but that was the starting point, and that gave us a view of the challenge in front of us. And so then we've gone through and made those changes there. We've looked, as Peter has already outlined, the capital delivery. We've moved levels of service, proposed changes from staff. We looked at staff capitalisation, making sure that they were recorded correctly. So that's effectively where you have staff working on capital projects, they can be capitalised, so there's less of an impact on the operating and this costs, and so therefore rates. We looked at the rating growth, so that's the extra people coming in, or extra ratepayers coming into the city. Traditionally, I think last year it was 0.8%, so we moved that to 1.2% with on the basis of the information coming from QV and where we were last year. I think last year we had an increase of 1.5% overall, but we don't anticipate that because there is some risk in getting too close, and we won't know what that is till right at the end of June. And we changed, smoothed our rating for debt repayment and asset renewals. We have a strategy of moving that to 100% being rating as opposed to debt funded. So we smooth that out. We won't be changing the date of being able to achieve that. It's still 2031, so that's that. And that left us with a position of 8.9%. So from there, we've taken through and we've looked at staff capitalisation again and found some more movement, so that's brought that down. We've looked at inflation across the organisation, those things where where inflation is locked into contracts. We've had to, it's quite restrictive, so we've put that through. Staffing costs we've put, and there's probably about $100 million worth of operating costs where it's a bit more, well, not subjective, but where council has more flexibility. And so we've asked the business to absorb the extra inflation. Like there is inflation already built in, but not to the higher level. So it's about 5.5, just over 5% had been already built in. So we've asked the business to absorb the rest. So there's some risk in that with we're not being able to absorb it all, but we're confident that that can occur. There was an increase from the general revaluation of as Andrew and the QB guides have outlined, in rates on 3 water pipe networks. It's a bit confusing. Council pays rates on its own property, but so that's a cost and an income, so it nets off. Where it does get a bit tricky is for those assets that are managed by ECAN. So that's what that represents there. So that'll be a cost that we're paying through to the ECAN folk. We've put in the roving pothole repair team. So that's about $2 million gross. We get almost half of that back as a subsidy. So it's an increase through there. The eco event funding. So that's for major events. And the proposal was last week at briefing come through, so it's about an extra 0.32% increase. We've brought forward the CRAF funded capital expenditure of about $6 million. So that's increased the operating cost for that. So that's the debt, well, not debt, but the we've got the money from CRAF already, and so it's sitting in the bank. We just don't have money sitting in the bank. We use it to offset our debt requirements. So that's the best use of those funds. So we'll bring in that $6 million out of, means we've got to borrow more for that. So that's the cost sitting in there. We've looked at our opening debt assessment, where that'll be, taking into account the capital projects for this year. So it's coming down. We've looked right throughout the organisation at revenue streams, and I've got a separate slide on this later on. Any different ways in which we can increase revenue, thereby reducing the requirement of rate. So that's brought a small amount back. You see they're all small amounts, and that's the way to attack it. There's no silver bullet here. We've just gone through in a lot of detail, small amounts to try and bring the total down. We've looked at FTE efficiencies, and so we've been able to find some there. And we've had another look at the rating growth estimate. And again, based on the advice through from QV, we've proposing to increase that to 1.3%. So that's a saving there. Now, in an ordinary year, that's where we would be sitting. We'd be sitting at 8.08%. But this is not an ordinary year. From the 18 months' time, or just less, that the three waters will be moving away from council. So that's going to reshape what council looks like considerably. So we can take advantage of a number of one-off solutions here, because one-off solutions ordinarily you might drive the rates down in 1 year, but that means that because it's a one-off, the requirement will bounce up in the next year. So the removal of three waters and using group tax losses is bringing the overall rate down to just on the 5.6%. So a bit more detail on some of the things that have gone through to make up the financial model at this point. So the events system I've already spoken about. Burwood landfill, so realignment of the revenue for what we'd put in the plan, and also an adjustment because of the market competition. There's a number of legislative things in through here, like for the dam safety regulations, RMA housing bill. They've got an impact on the rates requirement. The pothole team I've covered off. Wakakatahi, they've got a model which help council will work with them to better assess the road assessment, so be more targeted in the work that needs to be done. So there's a cost for that. And hydraulics modelling obligations, so that's for stormwater for the consent. And we've brought in the Central City shuttle, so that's just the cost for the investigation. So on the flip side, being able to reduce the rates, I've talked about the subvention receipts, so that's the tax losses. Parakuri timing, so that's now going to be later than we initially planned, so we're not going to need the money as early, so there's a saving through there. Lower recycling processing fees has been a bonus to us. Like I said, the FTE efficiencies is almost $2 million worth there that we've brought through. We're looking to increase the rates penalties to 10%. It was 10% previously. I think a couple of years it's been now down to 7%, so we're looking to put it back up to the 10%. So that's on those folk who don't pay their instalment in time. I'll cover rates rebates later on in the presentation. We're going to get a higher trans fund dividend, and again the venues Otatahi, that's aligned with the group tax losses as well, just how that's managed. So the Capital Endowment Fund, we've had a close look at that, and the recommendation is to use $1 million of funds sitting within this fund to substitute for rate-funded grants. Now the reason for this is that because of the higher interest rates, the fund is actually generating more income than anticipated. So it's got a balance so far of $320,000. We've got expected allocated this year $150,000. That leaves a balance of 1.377. Taking off the $1 million still leaves a balance of 547,000. So
yeah,
still
just to be clear, when you said funds, it's additional interest.
Sorry, it's additional interest. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Great.
Yes.
No problem.
Yep. So again, that's a one-off. That's not to be looking to repeat that. As I mentioned, we've looked very hard, well, across the board, really, at a lot of things, but just focusing on fees and charges, taking into account market forces, ability to pay for increases, and managing that, I guess, that balance between putting up the fee and impacting attendance dropping, and the slide sort of looks at those matters there that we've covered. So those are the aspects that we've gone through to cover off fees and charges, again to increase that as much as possible by bringing the rates down. So Andrew's just going to come through now and give us a...
So what we might do is stop there for, say, 10 minutes and take some questions.
Sure.
We'll just get OPEX dealt with and then move on to capital. So does anyone have any questions for Russell? Oh, Phil, sorry. You go first.
Can you just explain to me that just go back to that Burwood landfill stuff, if you wouldn't mind? Just explain that to me a wee bit more on why something's costing us more, because we must be bringing in quite a large amount of money for the amount of stuff that we're dumping there.
That's a good question, and we are, but we're not getting as much as we'd budgeted for. So we have to reduce that expectation from the budget. So that's for the what we had in the plan, and then having a closer look at it, like it's apparently quite a competitive market, and so again we've had to readjust that back as well. So I'm not sure, I can find out for you the total volumes and dollars that we are getting in, but that's a readjustment of the income expected to come through.
Oh, so it's not extra what it's costing us, it's just what we aren't getting, so to speak.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
And the Capital Endowment Fund, how much is actually in it? Was in it and is in it now?
I'm not sure. Sorry, I understand the total value.
So, and I can get you the detailed information. The Capital Endowment Fund is an investment fund, and it's only the interest that's spent every year, portion of the interest that's spent every year. In it at the moment, to memory, is about 300,000 K for this year, 320, and that's the fund.
How much is the capital? I might be wrong. I understood it was the profit from selling Orion. It was 100 million.
Yeah, and I think it's about 100 million that's in there.
So how much is in there now?
It's still a.
So why don't we? I mean, why don't we get? I know
Yeah,
Leah and I were actually talking about
we'll
yesterday.
get the detail of
We'll
what
get something
was in
circulated.
what the inflation.
Because it would
has
be. It's
adjusted.
actually probably a good time for new councillors as well to get up to speed with how that operates and everything. So, can we? Are you okay to Mary
Yes,
take that
yeah,
away?
and also we can get the information about how much we reinvest into the capital as well. So we'll get you that information.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Aaron, and then Sarah, and then Victoria.
Yeah, can you go back a few slides to keep going. Keep going. One more. Yeah, so the reminder of what has changed. So this is kind of a macroeconomics question, but because we hear the term cost of living crisis, and I know the word crisis is the most popular tweeted word on the planet for the last 3 years, but when we hear of a cost of living crisis, was there ever, and you look at all of the elements there, supply chain issues, labour shortages, which are pushing inflation, because we're in a free market economy, so when everyone's trying to buy a small number of items, the price just keeps going up. Was there ever a discussion between councils and even government departments to all put the halt on spending to bring down inflation?
Probably not a question for Russell, but no, it's a valid question. But
That's a great question. Well,
no, you don't want to.
If you don't ask it of him, who do you ask it of and when? Because we're in an inflation spiral, and when you keep spending, you can't spend your way out of inflation. You've got to do the opposite. And nearly every one of those bullet points all point to councils and governments, who are the biggest spenders in the country, overspending.
Yeah.
And so when do we ever have that conversation about, and yes, we adjusted our capital program down to what we could deliver only. We never spoke about taking it below that to drive down inflation. That's irresponsible in a cost of living crisis. Let's just take, it's a cost of living
Yeah,
thing.
we might just go to questions for
It's not
now,
really a
Aaron,
crisis because we don't treat it like that.
Yeah.
You're just
Okay.
simplifying it, Aaron. It's not that
All
simple.
right, let's not. We're not going to debate a public briefing.
Hey, I was just getting started.
Yeah, that's what worries me. Yeah, okay,
That's
Sarah.
for the budget meeting.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got two outstanding questions on OPEX from November last year, and I'm just wondering when that stuff's going to come through. One on community board funding, looking at what the operational funding is for those boards and how it's changed over the last couple of years, and the other one on the car parking situation and whether we can get efficiencies by stopping leases for some of our vehicle fleet. So both of those are still outstanding from November, and I sent through a reminder a week ago on those, but yeah, haven't heard back yet.
Is that an action the finance team can take away?
No, I'll take that up with
Dawn will
Lynn.
take away? Yep, perfect. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. One was in relation to, you mentioned that Three Waters was not included in the council's long-term plan going forward, but that the costs were just built into the long-term plan. Can we get clarification? Is it at the same rate just for the next 23-24, or is there any different allowance in there as we head into the new world, so to speak?
No, it's a great question, and it's a confusing space. So in essence, the current long-term plan is in force, and this is the last the year we're talking about is the last year of that long-term plan. So whatever we had in there, or whatever council had in there to work on, to spend, that stays. DIA are very interested to make sure that stays as is, that there's no change. So then when we build the next long-term plan, which we've already started work on, the Three Waters component is not in there at all. So that's a significant impact on all of council, not just the people who are directly involved in that, but there's a number of ancillary activities in there as well. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was just mainly in relation to whether it just stays the same or whether there was any tweak to it. And you've answered that. My other query is just, we talked about on the slide on what has changed that Aaron referred to before about the need to be increasingly more agile to respond to some of the external influences. I note that in the same breath we've talked about the one-offs that are not sustainable, and I just wondered whether you had any other comments in relation to our agility going forward, given that we've sort of raided some of that rainy day spending with these one-off non-sustainable initiatives that we've taken. Just whether you can make any comment on that.
Bear in mind Russell's an accountant, so he'll naturally be conservative.
That's right. Thank you very much for the question. Like I said, I wouldn't normally be recommending a one-off situation like that because it is, the following year has a significant impact on what rates will be. So because of the unusual circumstance, unique circumstances that we're in, we have an opportunity. So we are looking at that to be flexible. We've gone through pretty hard this year, or this process to thin out is just about everything that we can. I would say everything. It's following on from exercises that have been done previously prior to me to starting. But also the other major impact that I have some assurance in recommending that is that we're building the long-term plan, the next long-term plan. So because that reshapes council again, that will provide or open up revenues that we've just got to explore. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's like in 12 months things could be very different again, particularly without the Three Waters costs in there. So there could be some more positive changes for us in moving into the next long-term plan as well to compensate for some of those rainy day spending.
That's correct. Yeah.
Councillor Henstock, just to also add to that, both myself and the CFO are content with the proposals coming forward, quite specifically because we're moving into an LTP next year. It is not something I would recommend normally at all, but as Russell has said, these are exceptional circumstances. We're probably in exceptional circumstances for the next 10 years, but we are trying everything to benefit the residents directly in the current climate.
Thank you. Just in the slide where you're saying rating for debt repayment and asset renewals, that'll save 2.1%. Is it possible to have that figure split out into debt repayment and asset renewals?
Thanks very much for the question. It's one activity. So what we're looking to do was move away from debt funding asset renewals to rate funding asset renewals. So we had a strategy to achieve that by the year 2031. So it wasn't a linear increase, it was a wee bit jumpy. And so what we've done, because of the circumstances this year, we've looked at how much was being charged for, or how much was being requested to continue that strategy. But for the 23-24 year, we've just realigned that increase. So there's still something in there, but we just realigned that to be more smoother overall. We're still planning to achieve the strategy by 2031, but that was just taking some of the heat out of the 23-24 year.
Okay, and so, yep, okay. Because, I mean, when you're looking at the impact on the following year, 24-25, would it be safe to assume that a lot of those asset renewals are Three Waters anyway?
Again, that's a really good question. Certainly.
Which we won't have to pick up.
Percentage?
Possibly.
Water assets? Total assets?
I wouldn't try and guess those things at this point in time. It's a case we're taking a whole council view of it.
Yeah, is this the time to ask about the cathedral grant, or is that in the next section?
Well, asked your question, Yanni. It's just a timing
Okay,
change.
cool. So when we approved it, we were told that the grant from the council will only be made available once other sources of Crown and Church funding have been applied to the reinstatement project, and if fundraising for the cathedral exceeds the amount required, then the council's contribution will be adjusted accordingly. Are you able just to give us a sense of like why we're bringing forward the funding and if all those other sources have been used up, and what the fundraising amount is versus the project cost?
So I can give you, we will get for you the detail of that. However, the reason it's come forward, and we're only talking about 3 months, right, that we're bringing the funding forward from what we'd always agreed. It's just that it goes into a new year. That's the only reason it hits this. But I can give you the detail on all that. But yes, the first part is their funding from the other sources runs out. That's why it's come forward 3 months. Yep.
Yeah, we can do a memo for you, Yanni.
That's a good call.
Yeah,
Good
that's
call.
no problem.
Great. Okay. Hey, thank you very much, Russell. Andrew, do you want to come up and we'll go through CapEx? That's brilliant.
Kia ora koutou. Good morning, I'm Andrew Robinson, Head of the Program Management Office. This morning I'm just going to give you a bit of an update of where we came from the 6th of December. The capital program was reviewed and proposed changes were made to give us a deliverable program that was really important based on our past track record and performance. In doing that, we reduced the LTP provisions by 164 million through rephasing of the projects that were in there to a proposed 433. And on the 6th of December, we got some guidance from you and general support around that scale of program. This is what it looked like, the reduction from the FY24 year in the current LTP down to the more deliverable 433, and you'll see that the bow wave has been pushed forward into the LTP period, requiring us to do some more extensive review and consideration of those priorities when we get to the LTP. So that challenge will remain with us for the LTP considerations. So in doing this, we've got a realistic capital program that we should be able to deliver with the resources that we've got in the constrained market that we operate in. In doing that exercise, we ran a prioritisation process at a relatively high level. We looked particularly at things that were already committed and in flight. We looked at critical levels of service. We looked at regulatory requirements. And we looked at where projects were sort of joined up, project synergies, doing things together in little packages. So the changes that we made a zero change in the total LTP period across all those years, and the reduction is just in FY24. So definitely just a rephasing, but some further considerations for us as things like the strategic framework, the infrastructure strategy, and the financial strategy start falling into place. They'll provide us some guidance towards future prioritisation in the future LTP years. So just some of our key principles around deliverability. Just to remind you of these, we need to set realistic but demandingly achievable targets, and our track record gives us some good indication of that. We need to obviously manage the inflationary pressures which have been talked about by previous presenters. We think we can do that within the programs that we've got and the project contingencies, and if in the circumstances we have to bring back some money from future years, then we've got those provisions through the change management processes that we have as well. On the flip side, we need to be really careful about the any carry forward provisions so that we don't add to our planned commitment next year, and our intention there is to manage our way through this year with a net zero effect onto FY24, as we've been able to achieve relatively well last year. As I said, more in-depth assessment through the LTP process, so that'll be coming shortly. One point in particular, this middle one here, we need to be really careful about the impact of what I call attractive external funds, and I've got a slide on that to give you a bit of an update on that, a couple of those aspects shortly. So that's a quick reminder of where we came from 6th of December, and since that time we've had a pretty steady sort of continuation and refinement to the capital program from that date, and I'll just go through a few slides here to show you where those refinements have been made. There's been no big changes, kind of steady as she goes type of approach here. So the refinements to the capital program have determined a $439 million commitment for FY24 now. That's been some minor changes and some refinements, including the prioritisation of the CRAF program, which was referred to earlier. That's only a small impact, but it's made a small difference to the transport component there, the grey on the bottom left. The schedules that accompany this have been provided. The schedules 1 to 3 show the capital program by service, by ward, and by phase, and you're able to search and find your favourite projects through looking at those schedules, and that they support the detail behind these charts. This is a reminder of the impact of those rephases to what we call the primary drivers, and like a bit like owning your home or car, you must continue to paint your house occasionally and service your vehicle. So in some of the rephasing that we've done, we're showing here the impact of that on some of those primary driver descriptions, and we've got to strike a balance there about how we might compromise, for example, the renewal of assets or provision of new infrastructure, and balance that off against responsible stewardship of our assets versus how we can actually deliver them and afford them. So there are, like in anything, some compromises that we have to make in order to provide a deliverable set of projects. So just to provide a little bit more on this, one of these key principles around being able to deliver, there's currently two sources of external funding in front of the council. One is called the Better Off funding from central government. That's about $16 million over 5 years. Some of it's OPEX. It covers such things as some parks improvements, some tree canopy work, some pest control. There's a little bit of money in there for a contribution towards the Matatiki Hornby Service Centre and a heat recovery system, so it's around climate change related impacts. And also there's some funding in there for the South Library out in future years. So while we haven't fed these into the plan, the projects that are there are able to be accommodated, and we're waiting a final confirmation before we feed that in from a financial perspective. The second one is the SURF, Climate Emergency Response Fund. That's a transport choices sort of sub-package of that, and that covers from Waka Kotahi things like active transport, school travel and public transport. That one does potentially provide a significant kind of challenge for us in terms of deliverability going into next year. It's a $34 million fund, and as I warned in those principles, if we add it on top of our existing commitments, it could challenge us in terms of being able to deliver that and everything else that we've committed to in the 439. We've made provision in the plan for the access to those funds, so that's at 10% from the council gets you access to the 90% top up from Waka Kotahi. And staff are currently working through the options for how we can accommodate that, or how we might manage that by way of addition, substitution, extension of the fund, because there's some currently there's some criteria around when you have to use that money, but staff are in discussions with Waka Kotahi about the flexibility that we have around that fund, and we'll report back on that once that becomes clearer. But that's a good example of a category there, one of our guiding principles, if you like, about making sure we stay strong and true to our commitment of the 439. So expect to hear more about that as that crystallises. So in summary, we had a 433 number back in 6th of December. Nothing was cut from the total long-term plan. It was moved or rephased into the outer years of 25 to 31. Just a reminder in terms of the scale of rephasing that $164 million, it's a big number, and it equates to, for every, you might remember, every 80 odd million is a 1% rates equivalent per year. You don't get that in the first year. It's split with 25%, 75% pro-ratering. So for $164 million reduction in FY24, the rates advantage on that was around about 0.5%, accumulating to a total of 2% the following year. So we've landed on a 439 with the schedules updated and refined to support that, and as I said, further opportunity for prioritisation of those deferred projects in the next LTP process. And as Russell and others have spoken about, the Three Waters position will become clearer in that time to allow us to accommodate those decisions and movements as well. I've just spoken about the external funding. We'll monitor that situation and come back to you once it's all confirmed. We'll carefully manage that carry forward position and be looking for a net zero impact on FY24. And just to summarise, that 439 is probably a good position to land on in terms of our ability to deliver and do what we say we'll do. And it's sort of a balance between good stewardship of our assets and prudent financial management for a good deliverable program. That's it, Sam. From
Great. Do we have any questions on CapEx? Yeah, we do. So we'll start with Tim and then Phil.
Thank you, Andrew. When you mentioned capital attractive additional on page 43, I think it is, when we look at the Wakatahi funding and we get 90% for 10% investment, is our transport team then reducing their overall spend to take advantage of that, or do they have their program going forward and that doesn't change and they try and find an additional 10% to fit that?
Yes, that's a good question. There's 10% allocated to projects already that would ensure we qualify for that 90%. But we haven't put the 90% in there yet because we need to get our heads around how we can manage that without adding to the burden and making the 439 plus 34 million and then potentially make it undeliverable.
But then I guess the follow-up question would be, would we not reduce our transport budget to concentrate on the 10% to get the 90%? Because although we're staying with the 439, in reality, for some of that, we're only paying it's only 10% of our ratepayers' money rather than 100%.
Yeah, so that's some of the considerations the transport team is making now as to how to accommodate it and how to manage it, bearing in mind that some of the existing commitments would be attracting Waka Kotahi subsidies anyway. So there's already external funding components in the existing program. It's just getting that balance right and ensuring we don't overcommit.
So the principle, I would say this as you would expect, if we are able to secure government money and to fit it within the programme, we should be doing so, because the minute we turn down money, the ability to get money in the future becomes increasingly more difficult. So that's why, and I can see Lynette sat right behind you, is absolutely working through how can we pull the rabbit out of the hat. I don't want to give you a definitive answer now, Councillor Scandrett, because they're still working on it, but we will be doing our very best to have our cake and eat it if we can.
And I realise that, so if there are any shifting around required, then that will be coming to all councillors. Because right.
Yeah, Lynette, do you want to add to that at all?
I was just going to say that would come back to council. That would be your decision. We would come back with the options. Yeah.
So thanks. Along the lines of what Tim was just talking about, if we can't, because we can't deliver, we're holding back on that $34 million for climate change money. Does it have to be spent on, say, we'll say bus lanes or things like that, or things that transport team are real busy and they can't deliver what they're doing now without having the extra 39 million thrown at them? Can we throw that at, say, council vehicles, modifying them to use alternative fuels? Because is that what that fund is for, or does it have to be in physical things like bus lanes and stuff?
Yeah, I think I'll let Lynette answer the criteria of the fund there. Thanks.
Yeah, the team put in a bid, as we briefed you before the bid went in, the bid for particular projects. So you bid for projects and the projects have been successful. We are now figuring out how we could work to deliver that.
So we can't use it, if it wasn't in your bid.
Can't just randomly use it for other stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
We've got to use it for the bids.
Thanks, and thanks for the clarification, Dawn, because I think one of the things we need to make sure is that we are able to deliver this stuff, and we've seen in Auckland that making sure that we deliver our climate-related stuff that's to do with mitigation and adaptation is really important in this space. Are we looking at like a separate delivery model? So I note that, we've got a separate delivery model for Te Kaha, because otherwise Te Kaha would take us well over our, deliverability limit. It's still being delivered by council, but we've got we're looking at some sort of separate delivery model, because I know we've got, significant transport additional funding now.
Do you want to cover it? 'Cause it's resourcing.
We're looking at various things, Sarah. The underlying problem will still remain, though, whether you have a separate delivery model, whether we do it through whatever mechanism, the private sector also has to deliver what we want to deliver as well. It doesn't matter what the model is, it makes no difference in relation to that. So as I said before, we are trying very hard to figure out how we can make sure we can spend this money, because it's 90% government, 10% us. And Lynette's literally just returned from leave. Once I have that in front of me, I'll be able to brief you more formally.
Great, thanks.
Wastewater treatment plant, for example,
Right.
which we
Would
need
take
to
us
treat
well over.
separately.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Cool. Okay. And then Aaron.
Thank you. I was just trying to sort of, I'll give you Gloucester Street as a substitution, because the other external project funding was the Streets for People, and that's not being mentioned, but there's also commitments that we have under that program. So Gloucester Street has about 3.4, which ironically is about 10%, which would pay for those other projects. And we've also got a project underway, and the Finance and Performance Committee has shown that we don't have a hope of spending the Gloucester Street money in the current financial year in which it's budgeted. So just put the hands up for that one.
I'm sure
but I just wanted to get clarification on the CRAF, because
Well, hang on. Just one at a time. So on that one, what do you want?
Well, I'm just
It's
flagging
offering a
that as a
substitute.
substitution. So staff were saying that we've got.
So has that gone through to them so that they can, has that gone
Well,
through?
I'm raising it now because.
But
I'll email it in.
yeah, that would be useful if you can send it through so the team can actually do it as opposed to this. Yep, right.
Just wanted to
next one.
understand the CRAF project. So in the first briefing that we had, we currently had 15 million on budget for CRAF in 24-25, 16 million in 25-26. The first briefing we had, the proposal was that we take $11 million from 24-25 and $4 million from 25-26 and move that out to 26-7, 27-28. So the bulk of the money then got put into 26-27.
Yanni, I'm getting confused and I can usually follow this
So
stuff.
I just wanted to
just
understand.
at a high level, what do you want?
High level. Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand how much in the, not the individual by area, but just the total craft package, what the current proposed change is in terms of quantum for 25-24, 25-26, 26-27 and 27-28.
Okay. Right, so they won't have an answer. Well, you probably don't have that now.
There was a memo circulated to councillors that answered that question.
So can we just get
I can pull that out again.
some clear advice on what we're proposing to put into this
in the memo,
this annual plan, and how that's staged? Because we had a good briefing on it before Christmas, I think.
And it is detailed in that memo that went out before the last briefing we had at the end of January.
So can we just have something that reflects?
I'll chase that up. That's
got
fine.
the deadlines
So if we wanted to bring forward, if we wanted to keep the existing craft money on budget, do we need to get approval from Treasury, to make such significant changes, or what's the sort of permission approval process?
That's contrary to the resolution from council, which said we were leaving it as we programmed it.
Well, yeah, we had that discussion last week. So.
Can I just refer you back to that memo? I'll make it available to you. It's got the deadlines of the craft program and it's got the associated budget alignment with it. We've aligned it and refined it as best we can. If you want to make any further submission on it, I guess that
just at a high level, though,
there,
I was trying to understand if we need to seek any permission from central government around changes to the craft program.
The question's just been answered. No is the answer.
We don't. Okay, cool.
Can you just remind me, please, Andrew, for members and public's benefit, when that memo was actually sent out to elected members?
Yeah, the briefing we had last week to councillors ahead of this, it went out with
so it was
with
only
quite
last
a lot of
week?
attachments, so it might well have been lost in the myriad of other things, but it was in there together with one from about Pages Road and some phasing.
Thank you. So last week.
I've found it. Thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Yanni. We also went through that last year as well, and it was quite a useful breakdown of percentage complete by certain time periods as well.
That's correct.
We probably though do need to look at how we make that public facing. So if someone can take that away, that would be useful. Right, Aaron.
Yeah, so a couple of different questions. The first one is when we started in our process, I think around October, and we had the big number that we were looking to bring down. One of the questions we asked was around how many contracts hadn't been let in the current financial year, and we would look at, do we still do them? But I don't recall anything coming back yet. Has anything come back? Of any sort, right down to a lick of paint or, a few hundred metres of carpet?
Aaron, I think that did come back. I have a vague memory of it.
So we definitely looked at the status of all of the contracts, and from memory that information was provided before Christmas. Again, we can dig out the relevant schedules and make sure that you're fully aware of the assessment that was made.
Yeah, because at some point, I don't recall there ever being a decision or even a discussion around, would we still do that this year? Would we still do that this year? When, rates are at the rate of they increase they are and inflation's at 7.2%, it doesn't seem that the debates have been that robust in getting our costs down when we haven't had that discussion. So, the work may have been done, but we haven't discussed literally cutting anything.
So we'll get that circulated.
Will it be a discussion within this year, Sam? Will we actually save $1?
Well, it's a very helpful question, Aaron. Thank you. No, I mean
You're an accountant.
The reality is, just come back to the purpose of this. This is the public-facing briefing to show where we've got to today. This isn't the end of the sort of annual plan. We're still going to strike it in June. There'll be a end of February a debate around it where people can look at different options for different things. So yeah, certainly this is only getting the public up to speed where we have got to.
And the other one is a follow-up to Phil's question. I'm asking around that climate emergency money. Is that all prescribed, like you can only spend it on some bikes or a transport program or a bus, or if you can show that you could spend it on something that actually reduces carbon emissions considerably, you're allowed to spend it on that, like a fleet change? Like if you can reduce rubbish trucks by 90% emissions, are you allowed to spend on that? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so I think so. No, why don't we just stop? Why don't we stop?
Yeah, but
so,
it was just a straight no.
Aaron,
rather than.
We've just heard earlier on, but when we were briefed on it, there was a list of projects that we put in and was submitted. So it's probably not the place here to get into the criteria of the government's fund, but your point's certainly not lost. Okay, Tyrone. Yep.
So that is a no.
So your point's not lost, but we've already put in a list of projects which have been approved, so we can't change it even if we wanted to.
Right. Yeah. So it is pre-prescribed.
That's what I said. Your point is not lost. Yeah. Right, Tyrone.
Thanks, Sam. Sorry, this is quite a micro question, and I have raised it before and with staff, but I just want to double check. So there's a project on the head-to-head walkway where there's a proposed funding reduction of 200k. So it's going to have a negligible impact on rates, and I don't think it's a capacity issue. So I'm just kind of wondering what the sort of the thinking might be there, and how easily reversible that might be.
So if we just go back to the, I appreciate it's a micro level, but at the high level, what council had agreed before Christmas was that there was effectively a limit on the capital program. So if there's stuff that wants to be brought in, just got to find stuff to take out.
Talking about 200k here.
Great, so find 200k.
Or convince your colleagues to add 200k.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'll give you some. Yeah. Okay.
Look,
any other questions?
Yeah.
Celeste. Yep.
Can't resist a good micro question, but going back to some of the capital program areas that are being marked for rephasing, again, this was something that was covered last year, but in terms of the Waitaki Street Storm Basin, that one there was initially flagged for rephasing due to consenting issues, but now it's primarily a financial constraint. And I note that Three Waters don't recommend rephasing. Have we sort of reassessed projects that, in the light of what's happening elsewhere in the country, might be seen as more critical in terms of risk to the... So this particular project has impacts in terms of flood mitigation, and that's something I think we should be prioritising this annual plan, and whether we're looking at other factors that we should consider apart from the financial constraints.
Yeah, so it's probably a little bit similar to the answer I was going to give to the last question. So some of these refinements sort of come down to deliverability, which might be the design, development, or the consenting phases or whatever. So your particular one, Waitaki Street, I don't have it in front of me, but it will have been rephased to match the delivery program. To your question is, have we run another screen based on recent flood events up north? No, we haven't, but there's a lot of work in the program, the Three Waters program, stormwater and flood protection, that that do address those things. For example, the OARC program, and work around the Opawaho Heathcote catchment, which we've seen a lot of good success in. So definitely those things are occurring in the program, and the climate and resilience lens is kind of run across every project as it's designed as well, whether it's a park, a facility, or a stormwater network.
Just going back to that, I just want to double check with staff that this project itself isn't actually due to a deliverability issue. It's a financial constraint, so therefore it can be delivered. That's the last advice we receive from staff. I just want to confirm that. So perhaps
I
staff
can look
come back
into the
and confirm
Waitaki
that.
Street one more. If it's accelerating more than the funds provide for, there are bring back provisions that we could use if those funds are required earlier. But I'll have a look into it in a little bit more detail.
Thank you.
And it's, just to step up and think roundedly, and this is for everybody's benefit, what we are doing is putting forward a proposal in relation to our budget. This is our consultation phase. We are not setting the budget in any way, shape or form. You won't be doing that until the end of June. You'll have all of the hearings process to go through. You'll be able to do substitutions, bring backs, bring forward in your debate in June, which will allow you then eventually to set the actual budget. This isn't the end. This is only the consultation document. And it's important we get that consultation document out on the 28th of February to do the proper consultation with the public so they can also give the feedback to the elected members through the hearings.
And that's the point. I mean, really good question you raised, Celeste. So in the end, if you decide, if Three Waters have indicated they can deliver it, it's just getting enough of your colleagues convinced that actually that should be ranked higher than something else. So there's nothing to stop you doing that. Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Or else we'll move to... No? Perfect. Peter, do you want to come up? Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. Do you want to come up and conclude, please?
Right, in the home straight now. Look, we've actually seen a lot of this content before about the conditions we're facing, so I'm not going to line by line this slide again. Moving through, look, this slide is here, and I don't think we have Andrew anymore.
I can speak to it if you like.
But I think it is worth speaking to about why it's there.
Thanks very much, Peter. So the reason for that slide is pretty much in a response to a question from Council at the last briefing, and that the rates rebate is a program that Council administers on behalf of central government. So it's up to $700 per household. Can apply for low-income families. Can apply, so that's available. Council also has a large number of payment plans available for folk who have difficulty paying as well. But we're just reiterating that we administer it. We have no say in the amount we just help with the calculation and administer that for the ratepayers.
Okay, so I guess we're at the end of the beginning. We now we take the information that we've provided to you over the last few months and your feedback, and go away and build a draft annual plan for Audit and Risk Committee and Council on the 28th of February. Then we obtain the community feedback and go into the final. So as Dawn has outlined, this is one of many, many bites at the cherry. This is by no means the final. And lastly, it might be useful for Katie to come through and just outline how we're engaging with our community on the annual plan and the content in it. Some of it is unusually complex. The differential stuff is hard to communicate. So I guess over to Katie.
So consulting there from the 10th of March through to the 10th of April, that's a 4-week period. We're going to have all information up on our website, have your say pages, plus we're going to have limited numbers of print documentation in libraries and service centres. We're going to be rebooting that Bubbles tool for CapEx and OpEx expenditure, just to make it easier for our residents to see what's changed. And we're going to be promoting our consultation via our usual council communication channels, emails to stakeholders and networks, and as part of that email there will be a standing offer there to attend any community meetings that might be happening during the consultation period, and we'll also be running a marketing campaign. We're going to be doing some targeted engagement to encourage that diverse range of voices in the conversation, and we're going to be looking at a dedicated number for email for people to get in touch if they've got specific questions as a kind of a triage to make it as easy as possible for people to understand the conversation.
Kia ora. Just a quick question around the presentation around your comms and the documents that the public are going to see.
Mm-hmm.
What does that sort of usually look like? Sorry, I haven't seen documents, mate.
So we have a consultation document, which is where we effectively talk through what an annual plan is, what's included in this year's annual plan, so what's changed from the long-term plan, and we also highlight in the consultation document any key points or key questions that we'll be consulting on. So obviously the proposed business differential will be quite a big section in that consultation document. So that's a hard copy document. We also have that supported online electronically, and we could also be looking at, depending on sort of like how it all comes out in the wash, some separate kind of like A3 folded A4 kind of flyers that go into a little bit more detail if we think that's going to be useful.
I know that the comms previously around consultation have been under a lot of public scrutiny based on the legibility of it. What improvements are going to be made for this round?
Well, we always try to write in an easy plain English style, style, and we do spend quite a lot of time trying to make it as easy to understand as possible. There's always room for improvement, but as with previous years, we'll be looking very closely at as making it as easy to understand as possible, while also making sure that people get the information that they need. And that is a balance there, because some of the stuff is a little hard to explain, some of it.
Thank you. And I just had one, and Leah, it might be, I can't see Andrew Jeffries here anymore. Can you just explain to me, so the QV values will get loaded up onto our website. I mean, given the change in the valuations and the rating impacts, are we going to be able to have something indicative for people of the draft rate rises so they can log on and have a look once that consultation struck? Do you want to, is it you that can talk through that?
Yeah. No. So what's going to happen from tomorrow, the new CVs will be available on our website. As you know, that QV have got them already up. What we are working through is, which we haven't done before, but we are going to do it after the adoption date of your draft annual plan, because there's no point, we can't do it before that date because it may change. We will put another tab onto our website in that QV, which will show the indicative rates increase based on the revaluation and your draft annual plan rates increase. So they will be able to see there, but it won't be until after your draft date, adoption date.
Okay, so another month, and effectively I'll be able to log on, type in my address, and go, this is what we're proposing. I can submit on it if I want, and go, I think you should be doing this or not.
Yep.
Okay, great. We've got Mark, and then Yanni, and then Andre, and then we're out of time. So, sorry, I've been not. Mel will forever hold it against me. Mel first, and then we'll move through.
I can't remember which consultation it was, but there was a method where people could send in videos and do different ways of getting feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that could happen this time too?
I don't think there's necessarily any restrictions on how people can choose to provide their feedback. If they would like to send in video, we can certainly accept that. It's something that we'll be looking at more closely for the long-term plan, but if people would like to send in some video, then we'll make that work.
And on the other side, from our side, I wonder if, I know this is all a video essentially that we're creating now, but I wonder if like a video to talk through the consultation document and explain things might be a good way of putting this information out there, because we don't really tend to do that.
No, we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Just thinking, as elected members like to get out to things like markets and the likes, will there be some hard copies of the annual plan consultation documentation to take out for those sorts of direct engagements?
Yes, there will be some available. We're working through your governance teams to work out exactly what you might need, but you might find in that kind of a situation that a flyer might work better. Yep. Because there is, I guess we have to sort of like balance the costs of producing en masse a whole lot of printed documentation, and given where we are with our waste minimisation as well, with something that's a little bit of an easier read, but points people to where they can find out more information, and that's where the flyer really comes into its own.
Yep. Very good.
I just wanted to thank staff for putting the additional information on the website. I think that'll be really useful. The other thing I was wondering is, given the kind of quite significant increase for people's property values in some areas where they probably may not be expecting it, I know on our website we traditionally only use, I think, for a few months after we put the previous valuation. But are we able to show the trend over time, over the last, I don't know, 3 valuations, for example? Or just at least have the figure so people can kind of see what's happened?
I can't answer that, Yanni. I'll have to ask the question and just to see, what the cost of doing that is and the benefit of doing it. So I'd have to come back to you on that.
Okay,
cool.
Andre, and then we're done.
Thank you, Sam. I guess I'm keen to understand how many questions we'll be able to ask residents this year when this consultation goes out. Kind of carrying on from Aaron's question about decisions we'll have upcoming on what potential changes we can make to the annual plan. Obviously, we want a consultation to be as meaningful as possible. When we're asking the question, do you support a 5.6% increase? The answer is usually fairly predictable. No, we don't support that. But how many options will we be able to put in front of residents to have a say on this time around?
We don't generally frame everything in an annual plan as an option.
We're something to have a say on.
That's more accurate. We're putting it out there and saying, based on the conversations between staff and councillors, we believe that on balance this is a good way forward. And then it's open-ended what they provide feedback on. It could be as small as a project or as big as the rates number. So we're not going to go out with option A, B, C kind of annual plan, because it's important to remember the purpose of an annual plan is to keep the LTP current with changing events. It's a series of adjustments rather than the fundamental rethink of OPEX and CAPEX in a long-term plan. So we'll be presenting the adjustments we're making as on balance the best set of adjustments we can do. Does that frame it for you?
I guess I'm just trying to figure out if we've got the opportunity to ask many other questions for feedback,
differential,
as opposed to just the increase in plan as a whole. Keeping in mind that the plan is several hundred pages long, that the average member of the public will not be able to digest.
So the consultation document itself normally sits around sort of like 30 pages or less. We do some prompt questions throughout that around, have we got the balance right? That kind of carry on. How that actually works out in terms of the questions that we ask at the end, it tends to be a more general one to provide feedback. There will obviously be one about the business differential this time around, if that's something that has progressed. And there will be, I'm sure, a couple of other sort of like smaller questions that might link in directly to something in the consultation document.
Cool. Great, thank you.
Right, Andre, it's a really, really good question actually, because there's nothing to stop your community, for example, raising an issue that they're passionate about for council to consider in the annual plan if something is delayed that you want brought forward or things like that. So, really good question.
But to be clear, because I don't want some misinterpretation, if it was completely brand new, that's something that the council had never discussed, wasn't on its radar, you would not be able to slot that into the annual plan. That would be an LTP matter. Yeah.
Yeah, and fear not, I'm not going to try and slot heaps of things in.
No, I'm not suggesting at all.
I guess just my question was, I understand we're fairly limited for what changes you can make to annual plans. So I guess my question was, is there the possibility that or will it be likely that there will be other questions that can be asked to try and get feedback on things rather than just the plan as a whole?
No, because this is an annual plan process. If it's related to something completely different, then Katie will be having a conversation with the elected members who would have a report.
Yeah, understood.
And be going through whatever it was that you might be in your mind in terms of a consultation. It would probably be separate.
And I think Leah might have something to add, noting that we're 2 minutes over time.
Not for that. I just wanted to clarify, because I think it's really important the public understand this, in regards to Celeste's comment before, in regards to staff advice that said it was a budget issue, not a deliverability issue. What you've just misunderstood the answer. The answer is it's actually not it's the fact that your substitution you'd put in had no budget in 24. So you couldn't use that substitution to put this one in because the budget for those projects you're suggesting you substitute it didn't actually have budget in 24. It is a deliverability issue. So if you're going to substitute, you've got to ask for substitution on things that are actually in that year. So I just wanted to clarify that for the public, because I just want to be very clear. This is a deliverability thing, not affordability. We can't just throw more money at it. We can't deliver it. Thank you.
Yep. Great, thank you, Leah. That's very, very useful. Okay, well, I think, Katie, that concludes it. And Peter, thank you very much for bookending that for us and getting a run through.
Sorry, just a quick finish. Look, I know everybody was very tired towards the end of last year, there's been a lot of goodwill and a lot of high quality discussion in getting to where we are. It makes life a lot easier for staff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we'll continue to communicate as we work through that consultation stuff, and we'll make sure that the team here and the public can see that before it obviously goes, for a council decision. So, yeah, thank you all very much, and then we'll be back this afternoon.